Hello and welcome to the Bible for Worship at St. Paul Lutheran Church on this Sunday of the Reformation, when our gospel lesson is written in the Gospel of John, chapter 8, verses 31 through 36. Then Jesus said to the Jews who had believed in him, "If you continue in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will make you free." They answered him, "We're descendants of Abraham, and have never been slaves to anyone. What do you mean by saying you will be made free?" Jesus answered them, "Very truly I tell you, everyone who commits sin is a slave to sin. The slave does not have a permanent place in the household. The Son has a place there forever. So, if the Son makes you free, you will be free indeed." The Gospel of the Lord. Thanks be to God. You will know the truth. What an amazing promise! And the truth will make you free. And again, what a promise! And especially we can imagine for those who in the time of this gospel lived under the occupation and the thumb of the Roman Empire. You will know the truth, and it will make you free. This focus on the truth is so central to John's gospel. If we go back to the very beginning of the gospel, to that great hymn that opened it, we learn at the end of it that grace and truth came through Jesus Christ, the Son of God, the Word of God. And as we look through the gospel, we see that this term of truth occurs 3 times more in John's gospel than in the other 3 gospels combined. This truth is what Jesus reveals. And in that first chapter, the grace and truth that comes with Jesus stands in contrast to what Moses revealed. In chapter 8, we see the conflict between these 2 understandings. Those who are children of Abraham who follow Moses, and those who receive and understand Jesus' word and abide in his truth. Here in chapter 8, it becomes a pitched battle right after this passage. Why is it that this issue of truth and who has it right is so critical for John's gospel? We have to recall that the gospel is written 2 generations after Jesus' life and death, at least 2 generations. So for the gospel writer John, Jesus is as much an historical figure as Moses is. And as historical figures, they both become available to the gospel writer to talk about issues in the community's own day. And the issue for them was an issue of crisis and how to respond. The crisis was that the temple in Jerusalem, the temple of God, had been destroyed, leveled, burned to the ground by the Roman occupiers. And Moses and Jesus become symbolic figures for how to respond to that crisis. And in that day, it was a life and death decision. Which way will you choose is effectively what John is asking in a moment when significantly Rome dismisses the whole question. After 20 occurrences of the word truth in this gospel, the very last one is that moment in the trial of Jesus when Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor, looks at Jesus and asks, "What is truth?" For Rome, the issue is not truth, but power. It doesn't matter what's true. What power Rome has will determine what happens. Tragically, in many ways, over the centuries that followed, far too often the church chose neither Jesus nor Moses, but Pilate. The church chose to impose its power rather than to follow Jesus' truth. Because the truth that Jesus brought was the truth that is expressed in his final prayer to God on behalf of his disciples and others, that all may be one. It was a truth that he expressed in his final address to his disciples at the Lord's Supper, saying, "I have given you an example by stepping down from my place at the table and washing your feet, that each of you will serve the other." That servant leadership, caring for one another, or as he says in both chapters 13 and 15, love one another. And what is the epitome of that love? There is no higher love that one can show for another than to give one's life, to dedicate one's life to the well-being of the other. This is not what the church chose in relationship to the people of God in Moses, the Jewish community down through the centuries. Tragically, this gospel itself became the foundation for building a high wall and then throwing the Jews off the wall. But beyond the historical crisis that shaped this language of opposition, of life and death decision between this truth and that truth, the truth that lies in this gospel that Jesus brought is that arrogant judgment based on power is sin. Arrogant judgment that solidifies division between people, people that God has created on both sides of that division. Arrogant, power-based judgment that creates division. This is sin. But the Son brings a truth about honoring life, about loving service, about the oneness of God's people. And in that truth, the Son sets us free from sin. Just as Jesus prays to his Father, "I am in you and you are in me," just as God is one, so he prays, "May all God's people be one." That's a truth that can set us free. God bless.